Favorite books as a child, actually, I was really into like YA when I was younger, so I read a lot of Harry Potter and Hunger Games. I grew up in Iceland, and I think I really craved this escape from my reality, so I kind of ended up in almost like these fantasy novels. And I loved Winnie the Pooh as well. Speaking of, Joan Didion is one of my favorite authors. I moved to LA 2 years ago, and Joan writes a lot about LA and lived in the same area as I lived in when I first moved there, and it was like a big step in me romanticizing LA, and she almost became like a mother's voice for me in LA. And I mean, look at her, she's so cool with her Corvette. She's my idol. I think because my sister lives here, so I spend a lot of time here. I'll like do a little research. This sounds crazy, but if I like the UK edition better, I will wait until I come here to buy it. And then some of my favorite books, I have both the US and the UK edition of it. For example, I preferred the UK edition of On Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, so I waited until I got to the UK to buy it. So it's back in LA now, but this is the edition that I have. Beautiful writing. Very poetic. Eve Babbitt is another one of my favorite authors. She is kind of, I feel like she's like a crazier Joan Didion, but she grew up like in the 70s and writes a lot about the 70s, and 60s, 70s, and 80s in LA. And she was kind of like a party girl. Writes about her experiences like at the Chateau Marmont with these like famous band members. But then also her father was a classical musician, and her godfather was Stravinsky, which is one of my favorite composers, which I think is a very funny parallel that we have in common. But Joan and Eve Babbitt died like a couple of days from each other last year. It's crazy. Big loss. My earliest memory of buying a book with my own money was probably Harry Potter, because I think before then books were kind of given to me, but I distinctly remember being in China, in Beijing, really bored one summer. This was before I had a phone or anything, and I was reading Harry Potter, and I almost dropped my sunglasses there. I was reading Harry Potter, and I just like was devouring them, you know, reading them really fast, and yeah, so Harry Potter. There are definitely words that I've read in books. I always have a notebook with me while I'm reading, and I'll transcribe like little words or sentences that inspire me, and those will often end up in songs or in song titles. I also read one time, I'm a big Taylor Swift fan, and she was really inspired by Rebecca. I read somewhere that she was inspired by Rebecca on her folklore album. So I read Rebecca to kind of see how she translated those into like lyrics and into songs, and it's really amazing what she did. There were like, I was reading Rebecca and there were lyrics that I had, or words that I'd seen in her lyrics on folklore, and I was like, oh my god, like I want to do this. Same with like some authors, some poets that she's alluded to. I'm trilingual. I read mostly in English, but I read in Icelandic too, and in school I studied in Icelandic, so we didn't have English class, we had Icelandic class, so I've read all the Icelandic sagas and whatnot, but sometimes I enjoy picking up whatever's current in Icelandic. I'm collecting music books and artist and composer autobiographies. I read the Patti Smith one recently, and that was very inspiring. It was really cool to see how many lives she lived. You know, I think I often feel like singers, I don't know, I guess because I was just born and I studied music and then I became a musician, and you know, artists, there's so many different ways of becoming a musician. It's really inspiring to read, you know, what creates a musician, what makes a musician.